In this lesson, we're going to set up our camera rig for our character. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and provide the camera follow script to you. It's a complicated script. It has some things about checking margins and that's ahead of the player, and it's tracking the position of the player, and it's a nice smooth following camera. And so I don't want to get too heavily into scripting in an intro course. I wanted to give you a taste of that in the past couple of lessons, just so you can kind of get an idea of what to expect whenever you start creating your own games. So right now, let's go ahead and create the camera rig that we need to follow the player. So what are we wanting exactly? Well, if I hit play, you can see that the camera angle that we have is the angle that I'm looking for. And I want to be able to have the camera just smoothly follow the player as I'm moving around. And I want to have just kind of this springy type of action along with it. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to create an empty game object that is going to be the pivot point of my camera rig. So let's go ahead and rename this game object camera rig and hit enter. Now with this camera rig, I'm going to go ahead and reset the position, and that's going to set that to 0, 0, and 0. Now on the position, I'm going to type in 15 in the X, and then I'm going to type in 13, or actually not 15 in the X, 5 in the X. Nope. Let me pull this forward here. I always forget my values. It's 50 in the X and then 13 in the Z. Okay, so that's going to put me right on top of my player. If I hit F, I can frame in on that. And so that's where I want my camera's pivot point to be. Now at this point, you could start to move around the camera and get that as close as you want or as far away as you want. Here's where we want to start to really refine that process. So I'm going to set it to right about here. I think that looks pretty good. If you want to go to your game view, you can kind of see how that looks. So just kind of play around with that. Now what we need to do is we need to parent the main camera to the camera rig. So let's take the main camera, drag and drop that onto camera rig. Perfect. Now let's select the player game object, and let's go ahead and use the tag player. And so anytime that you're using tags, it's a great way to easily find a game object using that tag. This is very helpful with enemies as well. So whenever you have multiple enemies in a scene, you can tell a script to do something to all of them based on that tag. And with a player, usually there's only one, but in some cases you may have a co-op type of game. Tags are really important and they're very useful. So now that I have that set up there, I want to go ahead and drag and drop my character script, or not my character script, my camera follow script onto my camera rig. So let's go ahead and left click and drag and drop that onto camera rig. Select the camera rig and you'll see that we have the camera follow script. There are a couple of things that I want to do to this. You'll see that I have several parameters exposed from the script itself. The X margin is going to determine how far out the player can go away from this pivot point before the camera begins to follow. I'm going to go ahead and set this to a small value at about 0.5. We'll do that on the X and the Z direction. Now remember, X and Z, okay, right here. So I'm going to have that set there. Now, with this, it might be a good idea on your camera rig to orient this the same way to your player. We don't necessarily have to do that because it's tracking the X and the Z at pretty much the same rate. Okay, but that might be something to think about. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. Let's unparent the main camera. Let's make sure this is clean before we even get started. And let's rotate this 90 degrees. So I'm holding down Control to be able to do that. You could also type in 90 on your Y. And then with that camera rig, if you take a look at your move tool, you'll see that Z is now forward and it matches the player object. Okay. So now let's take the main camera, let's reparent that to the camera rig. All right. So our X and Z margin are set to 0.5, and that's basically just how far out the player can get away from that pivot point. And then the X smooth and the Z smooth is basically how fast the camera comes back to the player. So this is going to be our springiness. So the higher the number, the faster the camera will snap back to the player. Let's go ahead and set this to a value of about 2. Hit enter on that. And then we have the max X and Z and the min X and Z. And what this means is it's defining our level constraint. Okay, so our level right now is set from this corner at 0, 0, all the way out to this corner, which is 250 and 250. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my X value to 250, my Y value to 250, and my Z value to 250, okay? Because height is also in that. Min X and Z, we can leave it at 0, 0, and 0. So that way the camera will always stay within the bounds of this particular level. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and hit play, and let's take a look at what we have. So if I begin to move, you'll see the camera follows along, and you see the springiness and the smoothness of that camera as it moves along. You can see that the character starts to get away from the camera a little bit as it comes toward it. It's not too bad, but we may think about maybe adjusting that X smooth to maybe about 1 on both of those. I don't want the player to get too far away from that. So that seems pretty good. It's not too bad. And actually, you know what? I went the wrong direction. Let's set that to 3. I want that to go a little bit faster. And I went against what I just said. So larger numbers increases the springiness of that camera. All right, I feel pretty good about that. You know, we may just bump that up to 4. I like a smooth camera, but I also like it to be nice and snappy and be able to show me the rest of the level as well. So, all right, so that's looking good. We can now run around our level. You can see that with our terrain, you can't really get too far up into the sand. It keeps our player from going up in there. So we've kind of created some walls in this using the terrain. So we can kind of run around. I'm kind of looking at the level and I'm seeing that there are some bare spots. I can see some of the larger rocks as I go along. We may want to set dress some of the pathways. And also the pathways, they seem to have pretty much the same color. We may actually make that path a little bit darker. So, but you kind of get the idea. We can run around and it's kind of like a maze. And so now what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to get to the middle of this. So the collector bot's going to go through and he's going to start collecting energy pieces and things like that. And we want to be able to get to the middle so he can deposit those energy pieces into the mothership to try and shut it down. And so that's kind of part of the game too. It also might be helpful to maybe add in like some signs that show which way to the mothership, so that way the player can find that very easily. And it looks like right here, this is the middle of that, and so this is where the mothership will be, and the player will collide with that and then deposit the energy, and they can go back and start collecting more throughout the level. Now he's also going to have to dodge enemies as he goes through, so he's going to have to try and get away from them. And there will be 4 enemies on the map at one time, and we'll talk about how to get those set up next.